Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us again. My name is John Grubb, the Chief Operating Officer here at the Bay Area Council. This is our second webinar in an official series of webinars that we're doing in a COVID-19 world, and we really appreciate that you've given us your time today to join us and that you support the Bay Area Council. The federal government has passed a $2 trillion relief and stimulus bill. And as many of you know, it covers stimulus checks to citizens, unemployment insurance, paid family leave, paid sick leave, mortgage and rental relief, student loan relief, and much, much more. For our conversation today, it also includes bailouts and stimulus for transportation and housing, and major support for companies, for small companies and others that retain their workers. And so what we're going to do today is going to be less presentation and a lot more Q&A. So I would urge you to get ready to ask lots of questions. I'm going to be reading your questions, and all of the panelists are, and we'll be sort of dishing them out as we go. We'll start with a few questions with our panelists to get going, but that's going to be our format for today. In terms of the relief and stimulus bill, we want to understand, what does it mean for us in the Bay Area? How can our member companies get the support? What will happen to the infrastructure that our region relies on? In a pre-COVID-19 world, we had the second worst traffic in the country, and we had a raging housing crisis. That housing crisis, of course, hasn't gone away, and we do anticipate it's in some fashion that our transportation infrastructure is going to be very strained when we start to return to normal. And how is this crisis affecting that transportation infrastructure today? Without any riders, what's happening to those budgets, and can they get up and operating once we are back to normal? And we're also going to explore, is there more stimulus coming, and what does it look like? And how can we potentially shape that? So we have really an all-star panel that's assembled. We've got Georgia Gann Dohrmann. She is from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. I'll do a little bit more of introduction of each of these people as I introduce them. We've also got Michael Bernick, who was the former head of the EDD and the Employment Development Department of California, and is really an expert in workforce and how you, if you're from a company, could actually benefit from some of the relief that's coming out. And then we've also got Ellerbe, and she, I have in my notes here, is a stone cold killer. So she is someone who is hired as the lobbyist of lobbyists. And so she really understands the inner workings of Washington, D.C. And what has come and what could come in the future. So I'm going to start actually with Georgia Gann Dohrmann. So she does federal government relations for the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments, a newly merged entity. She previously worked for Mayor de Blasio in New York, who seems to have produced a lot of talent out of that office, and then also worked in the U.S. Senate on transportation issues. And she's a graduate from UC Berkeley, a local gal. So Georgia, could you talk a little bit about what was in the relief package for transportation and housing so far that we have here in the Bay Area?
Sure. So first of all, thanks guys for having me here. And I will secondly say, just on the framing, I'm strongly encouraging all the folks in my industry to not be talking about this as a bailout, but an emergency supplemental package. What we have in there for transportation in direct grants is $36 billion out of the $2.2 trillion in emergency grant assistance. That money is really targeted to the hardest hit transportation operators sort of around the country. And so for the transportation network operators, so really is targeted to transit, to airports, and to Amtrak. And the resources are intended to backfill the severe revenue losses that all of those different industries have been facing over the last month or so. to make sure that the operators can keep the lights on, that they can keep the essential vehicles running, the services up, and so that they can weather the near-term crisis. So John, as you mentioned, as people start getting back to work, the systems can be up and running to serve the public. The bulk of the money goes to transit operators. 25 billion of the about 36 billion is directed to transit. The Bay Area transit operators can expect to receive about 1.3 billion of those resources. This was a huge win. I think we owe an incredible thanks to Speaker Pelosi and to the rest of the Bay Area congressional delegation for bringing those resources to the Bay Area. That 1.3 billion correlates with the estimated revenue losses that the region's transit operators are facing from the COVID-19 crisis. And really what that will mean for them is that, and I would say that the Bay Area operators across the nation have been particularly hard hit. They are an essential service, so they are needed to keep trains and buses running to get people to and from hospitals, to grocery stores, etc. They also have been seeing some of the most sort of severe revenue losses from around the country. We've seen 90% ridership drops across most of our major transit systems, so that's a huge dip in fare revenues. A lot of our transit operators really depend on fare revenues to keep buses running on a regular basis. I would say more so than a lot of folks from around, a lot of other operators from around the country. Transit just is a sort of high fixed cost industry that does not have a huge amount of reserves. So our transit operators were sort of facing worst case scenarios of complete service shutdowns, system-wide furloughs and layoffs that would have been terrible for the 15,000 plus Bay Area transit operator workers in the region, the people who are depending on the services, and also for the long-term ability to serve the public when people start going back to work. So again, that 1.3 billion will stave off a lot of the worst case scenario. What this means for and I will say again that this is all 1.3 billion in operating expenses. It's not what we're looking at sort of over a longer term stimulus that I believe Crystal and others will be talking about, with the potential future COVID for supplemental. Then the rest of transportation is that we're seeing that Amtrak receives $1 billion in operating funding. Capital Corridor has reached out and let us know that that'll be essential to keep them afloat through this crisis. And then there's $10 billion in formula grants to airports. So Bay Area airports will receive their fair share of that. I'll say that is in addition to the loans that are available to the airline industry and the $35 billion that will be available to in financial assistance for air carrier employees. I think, John, you also wanted me to touch quickly on the housing stuff.
Yeah, yes, please. Yeah.
So housing is a little bit less rosy, I guess, in the assistance bucket, but there's $12.5 billion nationwide for emergency rental assistance, for housing and homelessness grants, and then flexible money for local governments to invest in housing and economic development. We don't have a great estimate yet of what that means for the Bay Area, in that a good portion of the money will be distributed according to need at HUD's discretion, at the Department of Housing and Urban Development's discretion. So we'll be keeping an eye out for that, and happy to keep you guys, updated on what we think that'll mean for the Bay Area. Regardless, it's certainly not going to be enough to stave off, a new wave of housing instability that we expect to come. That alone won't be enough to stave that off. I think that what will be sort of important for this group and for all of us to be keeping in mind as we move forward is that, we need to think about this, or it'll be helpful as we're assessing what we might be needing, again, from the feds and from the state in future support packages, is going to be like a holistic look at what the resources are that the feds have provided in the CARES Act and the previous supplementals in direct assistance to individuals to help pay rent. Really importantly in the business assistance that will help keep people employed so they can have money in their pockets to pay rent. And then, the governor did issue an emergency statewide sort of anti-eviction or eviction protection order, and a lot of local governments in the Bay Area have done that as well. And they've also increased emergency rental assistance options. So it will take some time to look holistically at what the lay of the land is and what's needed. But I think that there will be a big need for sort of a concerted push to have more resources for housing production and then really, preservation to keep people in their homes.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Georgia. That was a great introduction. So I'm going to turn us over to Crystal Ellerbe. So Crystal has spent 20 years on the front lines of lobbying in Washington, D.C. As I mentioned earlier, she is a stone cold killer. And she's worked for her list of projects that she's worked on before COVID-19 brings us back to what the world was like before. But a lot of healthcare and transportation lobbying. She's worked on housing and affordable housing credits. She's worked on 6G cellular. And a particular note of what would be fun to talk about in another time would be space technology and space debris. That she's worked on, but right now she's working furiously for her clients on the stimulus bills that are coming. And I wanted to start out, Crystal, asking you, what do you think are the chances that additional stimulus may come out, especially related to transportation and housing? We're going to get in soon into this forum, into the employer relief portion of this, but what are the potential transportation and maybe housing stimulus that could be coming? What are the chances? How will that look? What will be different about it?
Well, one of the things that I learned yesterday from the ranking Republican in the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, he's basically saying everything is on the table. So that means from surface transportation to transit and to other transportation items as well. The Democrats, particularly Speaker Pelosi, as everyone may recall, back in January, they released their framework for infrastructure package, and that was $706 billion. And it just wasn't transportation, it was housing. Well, it was a little bit of housing, water infrastructure, wastewater treatment, surface transportation, harbor maintenance, you name it. They want anything that's involving infrastructure, they want it. So Speaker Pelosi has been talking to her caucus about going back to that framework. With regards to housing, I can honestly tell you this. I talked to House Financial Services Committee member who's a Republican, and basically he's saying the messaging is this. They are only worried about right now the immediate need, but one of the things that they have been talking about is the emergency rental assistance. And I do know Congressman Denny Heck out of the state of Washington has actually put forward a bill with regards to emergency rental assistance, because this is a bomb that is about to blow up really, really soon, because a lot of folks don't have the resources to provide, to keep paying their rent. So this is one of the things that everybody is talking about. Congressman Heck is trying to do his part on the House side. We've talked to folks on the Senate side, specifically Senator Wyden's office from Oregon. They're really interested in pursuing a Senate companion bill to Congressman Heck's bill with regards to this, because renters, there is a huge need for renters. And one of the other things with regards to housing, I have another client, Up for Growth Action. We've been working to try and build more housing, and particularly around transit. We've been working in the state of California with Scott Wiener, and we've been working on the federal level to try and get localities to start looking at the feasibility up front before they go into a capital investment grant program for a transportation corridor to figure out if it's feasible to build housing near transit. People want to live close to where they work. And so these are a lot of the things that will likely be coming forward, but I can tell you, from the caucus meeting on the House side, housing was not brought up. in this next infrastructure package, which is kind of surprising. The New Dem coalition, they're going to put out a letter on their top priorities. They want housing in this infrastructure bill, because the only way to get people, homeless people who are on the streets, those that are about to become homeless because they don't have the financial resources, we need to figure out a way to keep them housed. And so we're working with other member offices on the House and Senate side to get them to understand that you need to have housing in this infrastructure bill. A lot of folks have been telling us you need to reach out to leadership. And so we're going to reach out to the leadership offices with regards to that, because that's a key component. But I will tell you this with regards to the next infrastructure, the package itself. Senate Republicans and House Republicans are like, nah, we don't want to do anything right now, because we're still waiting on the implementation of the $2.2 trillion that we just passed last Friday. But Democrats are like, no, we really need to fill in the gaps of what was not funded. With regards to state and local governments, and specifically local governments, there's there's $139 billion, and it's the COVID relief fund. But unfortunately, it's only for cities that have populations that exceed 500,000. And so a lot of smaller cities are going to lose out on funding. So that's another opportunity that we'll see in the next relief package. And also Speaker Pelosi has talked about the SALT provision as well that was taken out of the tax cuts bill back in 2017. She's told the New York Times she wants it retroactive. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that's another thing that might be in the next infrastructure package. I think we'll know better next week. Both House and Senate are in recess right now, and they're coming back April 20th. And so I think probably by the end of this month, you'll see something, but it's going to start to get very partisan really, really quickly, because Majority Leader McConnell is saying one thing, that we don't need anything. But, again, having talked to Republican offices, they're basically hearing from your constituents saying, how am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to keep covered on, healthcare, or, small businesses like the restaurant industry? How am I going to keep afloat? And a lot of people are having difficulty with regards to how do they apply for funding through the Small Business Administration. There have been some implementation of promulgations of regulations from the Department of Transportation. They just released information with regards to the transit portion of it today. And they have done the same thing for air carriers and airline manufacturers as well. And with regards to the Department of Labor, on Monday in the Federal Register, there's going to be a temporary promulgation of rules with regards to paid leave under the first relief package. So there are a lot of things that are transpiring right now. But with regards to the next steps, it's anybody's guess. Again, Republican offices have told me this is not going to be a Christmas tree bill. They don't want it a Christmas tree bill. But President Trump has said he's in on infrastructure. And you know what? Deficits don't really matter right now. They haven't mattered since, the president has gotten into office. So don't think that, billions are a lot. They're not in this case, because we're dealing with a global pandemic.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Crystal. So I'd now like to turn to Michael Bernick. So Michael Bernick is one of the crown jewels of Duane Morris, the law firm here in San Francisco. He's had a really interesting career. He's been a warrior, I would say, and eventually a general in the workforce world. He started in San Francisco doing community job training work, and then he became an advocate and a real intellectual of what was the welfare reform that was developed and adopted during the Clinton era. And then since then has been charting and implementing strategies as knowledge-based work grew here in California. So he ran California's 10,000 employee employment development department. And he's been very closely watching and helping companies, and I would humbly say nonprofits, figure out how they qualify for relief in the new federal stimulus that we're talking about today. And so, Michael, I'd like to ask you to lay out for the folks that have joined us, what are the relief provisions that are there for companies and nonprofits, and and maybe a couple pieces, how do you apply, how fast will it move, and just sort of open up that topic, if you will.
Thank you, John. As you say, I date back to the stimulus efforts of the Carter administration. So I've seen a number of these stimulus. What I want to talk about this morning is extraordinary. We've never seen anything like this in terms of basically subsidies to employers to keep employees on their payroll, also to pay independent contractors. And I think it's a program that all of our businesses in the Bay Area that have been significantly impacted negatively by COVID-19 should look at. Again, nothing remotely comparable in terms of our previous stimulus efforts dating back really to World War II. What I want to focus on is there are two main SBA programs. One is the Paycheck Protection Program, the basically $350 billion, and then there's the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. That's $10 billion, and I'll cover that second. But the Paycheck Protection Program is a program that's open to all employers under 500 employees. And basically, it provides 100% forgivable loans. Yes, John, that's right, 100% forgivable loans to use over an 8-week period. They can be used to cover payroll costs, mortgage interest, rent, utility costs. And as you can see, it's a big influx of money over a short period of time, an 8-week period, to help employers try to keep people on their payroll and keep in business. So that's the first point. It goes across sectors, across occupations, and again, employers who are under 500 qualify. The loan amounts, number two, it's either 10 million is the cap, but there's a formula, basically 2.5 times the average monthly cost, payroll costs. It's a I would say it's a very, very simple process. This program is both simultaneously complex in some ways in terms of the formula for calculating the loan and also for giving the loan, but it's also strikingly simple in the information requested or required and the process. The information required, you can apply directly to SBA, but you can also apply, and I'd recommend going through any SBA certified bank. And my view is if you have a relationship with a bank, that should be the contact. The banks will be taking in these applications. They'll be starting tomorrow to go through June 30th. And at least we're told that compared to the monthly time or several months that these previous other SBA programs can take, they're hoping to have decisions made within a matter of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. And further, John, the money wire transferred immediately. Again, this is extraordinary in terms of it's an extraordinary attempt to put a lot of money into the system very quickly to try to stop businesses or additional businesses from closing and job layoffs. As you saw this morning, our numbers nationally were over 6 million new unemployment claims. So it's a program that I think everyone again should look at. It's moving very quickly. The loan application's open tomorrow. You apply through your lender, there are a lot of other complexities, John, I can go into, how you define payroll costs, which also, by the way, include not only wages, but benefits, payments to independent contractors, retirement payments. So it's important to know those, the definition of payroll costs, the fact that, again, it does cover independent contractors, But I think the big takeaway, and I'll end here, the big takeaway is the coverage of this, the fact that the loans are 100% forgivable if you meet certain conditions. Basically, if you use that money over an 8-week period to cover payroll and other specified expenses. You can't use it to go to the Bahamas, John, but you can't go to the Bahamas now anyways, John. So, as long as you use it for the specified items, it's 100% forgivable. And finally, I'd say there are a lot more details. I will push my own writing. I have a piece on it in Forbes this week that sets out sort of the main elements of it. And I would say if anyone has any questions, if you Google me, or you'll get my email address and phone number, and I'm available for any emails or calls on more detailed questions. We just don't have time to go into detail.
Yeah,
today.
no, that's great, Michael. So I think there will be some specific questions that we'll get to as we're going. And by the way, a few folks are already starting to submit questions. And so if you would like to ask questions of any of our panelists, please make sure that you use the Q&A button. It's on the bottom of your screen. You'll see it where you can actually write in questions. Michael, let me ask you really quickly.
Sure.
You mentioned working with your lender, or your bank that you work with. I believe the banks that qualify are called 7A lenders, which is 7 and then parentheses A lenders. Is that what people should look for to figure out? Maybe they work with multiple banks. What's the best way to find out if their bank does qualify and they can work with them?
Well, I would contact the bank right away, and whatever bank you're working with, yes, it is limited to SBA certified, but most of our big banks are SBA certified. I would reach out to the bank, find out, and let the banker know that you're interested in applying for this Paycheck Protection Program.
Okay. And can you describe, and again, I will be getting back to you, Georgia and Crystal, but real quick, Michael, so how does the Paycheck Protection Program differ from this is from Steve Myers, by the way, wrote this question, but from the economic injury disaster loan? There's at least two programs.
Well,
here.
yeah, it didn't really touch on economic injury disaster. The main issue, John, is that the economic injury disaster loans have this $10,000 advance that people get, and very, 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 very favorable terms, but they are not 100% forgivable. The thing about the Paycheck Protection Program, it's 100% forgivable loan if you spend the money in the specified ways, which again are pretty broad. Payroll. They want businesses to use this money to keep employees on payroll. So you can also use it for 4 or 5 other main expenses. But assuming you do, you don't have to repay it.
Okay. So thank you, Michael. That was great. So Georgia, I'm going to turn back to you, and I wanted to ask if you've seen any relief efforts coming out of the state government, and if there's any plans there, and how it might or might not harmonize with the federal relief, in particular towards housing and transportation. But I'll leave it open to you if you want to comment on anything else.
Yeah. So, as all you guys know, the state is out of session until April 13th. They have not announced anything yet, but my best guess is that they will extend that, to at least May. And the conversations with the state are ongoing about, stimulus and relief. I think it's all hands on deck. On the housing side and transportation side, the governor's office has been reaching out. They're definitely looking at what's needed on the near term on rent stability and on, keeping systems operational. And then the team has also been thinking about, longer term economic stimulus. I think because the feds are going, kind of unusually fast in this situation, what the state is working on and what sort of advocates are working on with the state is encouraging kind kind of everybody to harmonize and looking at the state to fill in the gaps to where the Fed, like of what the feds, don't cover. So it's all very fluid, and, I would certainly expect the state to be playing a big role in this. But what the state's role ends up needing to be, I think, will be very much determined by, on the stimulus side, will end up being very much determined by what we see on the federal side coming out of a potential CB4 package.
Okay. I lost my question. So let me turn this to Crystal then. So Crystal, for the Bay Area, what do you think are the things that we should be focusing on the most in terms of cleanup language or pieces that we, our region is a little different than other regions of the country, right? We have a little bit of a different economy, a different public transportation infrastructure, different crises, including the housing crisis. What do you, given the lines that you see and where the power structure is, what's sort of the best path for us as an employer community, and as well as with our partners and local government and transportation agencies, all of that as a community together? What should we be doing? What's our best way to get additional relief going forward?
Well, I think one of the things that we've been doing for our clients is we've been gathering information about their immediate needs and then drafting it into a letter to leadership and the committees of jurisdiction. One of my clients, they are an electric propulsion engine manufacturer for all electric airplanes. And one of the things that they're concerned about is congressional oversight of all of this money. And also they're concerned about how it's going to transform the industry as a whole. So with regards to your membership, it would be vital to find out what they need, put it in a package, to the congressional delegation that's in the Bay Area, but specifically reach out to Speaker Pelosi's district staff and let them know this is what you need. I mean, put it succinctly and, concisely as possible, because I know they're inundated on a lot of different levels. I mean, so you can go through her personal office, her leadership office, but they want to know how they can help. And they won't know if you don't tell them. And so that's what a lot of things that we've been telling our clients. You need to let us know what you want in the next package. And a lot of them, have told us there are some things about, waiving some regulations to make things more smoother with regards to, transportation projects or housing projects, trying to build more housing. You have to let them know. One of the things that I know all members of Congress have been doing is they've been doing virtual town halls. And so that's your opportunity to talk to them directly and say, this is what we need, because, they need to hear it personally. Because as a former staffer, I'm gonna tell you, when we went through Katrina, hearing from folks on the ground, letting us know like what's working and what's not working, how do we make it easier for you to survive this and to move on into economic recovery, that is the best way to do it, is letting them know. You gotta get engaged and you have to let them know.
Okay, and Georgia, I'm assuming that you may have already been having some conversations with our delegation, and I'm wondering sort of what have been those conversations about the next potential stimulus.
Yeah, so I mean, Crystal, I think what folks in DC have really been asking for right now is exactly what Crystal said. What are the needs assessments to help them try to determine what should go into a next, a next package? The Bay Area Council has been such a strong leader on transportation and housing infrastructure from a perspective both of, making sure that the Bay Area has a good quality of life, and also because infrastructure and construction can be such a massive jobs creator. I think the number for transportation is every $1 billion invested in transportation infrastructure creates 30,000 jobs. So there's been a lot of interest in the idea of infrastructure, and in particular looking at the Bay Area's infrastructure from an economic stimulus perspective. there's also, I think what we have been working on at MTC and ABAG is trying to identify what the massive revenue gaps are going to be. And like, we had great plans. We have a lot of great plans. And folks, we were all looking at going at 2020 as an opportunity to raise some significant revenues to upgrade the Bay Area's transportation network and really invest in our housing infrastructure and try to address the housing crisis. And, the future of that is up in the air now. So, and we're also looking at 30 to 50% drops in VMT, which means huge drops in gas tax revenues. Sales tax revenue estimate drops, we're looking at up to 75% estimated decreases. And in the Bay Area, we have so many self-help counties that have, revenues and parcel tax revenues and all of that goes to fund transportation and housing infrastructure. So anyways, we're getting those numbers ready, sharing them with folks on the Hill, and then really making the case to let them know that there is going to be a massive need in the infrastructure space in the Bay Area for support. And, we know that it is a good economic stimulus. And so what we're also working on is trying to get some good ideas together to share with our delegation on the types of things that benefit the Bay Area. So, what we want to make sure is we can fund those smart types of infrastructure projects that really improve quality of life and mobility in the region. So transit has to be eligible. On the housing side, the low-income housing tax credit is by far the best tool for a P3 housing production in California as a whole and in the Bay Area. And I just was texting with Speaker Pelosi's office, and they said, yes, we are thinking about the low-income housing tax credit. There's a bipartisan proposal, House and Senate. So, those are some of the things we're thinking of sort of on the technical side. But I think that what the Bay Area Council was able to do with working with the major metros groups and identifying what is something that across the country everybody needs and we can get behind, that I think that made a really big difference in being able to secure $25 billion nationally in transit operator assistance, and will be something that we need to be creative and working with partners around the country on what is something that benefits the Bay Area as well as other major metros.
Right. Yeah, that'll be essential for us. Is that how is aligning a regional plan and a sort of a regional plan, and then making sure that other similar regions across the country, we're all advocating together to be able to secure it. I'm sure Crystal would agree with that. Georgia, I wanted to ask you also, with the funds that we've secured in terms of transit operation funds, how long, maybe you can't predict this, but how long will that cover? Is that going to cover 3 months of losses? What does it look like? I'm personally really worried that we're going to start to return to normal, but people aren't going to want to get on public transit because they're scared about, catching communicable diseases, especially COVID-19. And so we're going to put our transit operators, who are an essential part of our transportation infrastructure, into a bit of a death spiral, where they have to maintain operations, but there's not enough riders to pay for it, and it just keeps going. And meanwhile, our roads will get completely clogged up. Of course, there may be more people that work from home, but still, I think our road capacity just is horrible here in the Bay Area. So, how much did we get? How much is covered, and how much of a threat is that for our quality of life here in the Bay Area?
Well, the $1.3 billion estimate that we shared with folks on the Hill was was assuming that this COVID-19 emergency, continues to have impacts throughout the end of the calendar year, so through December 2020. That was an estimate of revenue losses. And so, it was a conservative estimate of revenue losses for the Bay Area. So there's a chance that it could get us through the end of the year. There's also, estimates are just estimates. So as we keep seeing numbers, and I will say that as we keep seeing numbers come in, Those estimates that we thought were really conservative actually are what we're seeing on that. We estimated 90% decrease in ridership, and we're seeing 90% to 98% decreases in ridership on systems throughout the region. So, but it should get us past absolutely a couple months, 6 months or something like that. I think, in South Korea, we've seen transit ridership back up to 90% of the levels that it was pre-COVID-19. Oh. Obviously, a different culture, a different level of transit dependence. But, there are similar questions about public health, about spreading communicable diseases. So I think the short answer is we don't know what long-term impact COVID-19 will have on transit and around people's willingness to ride. But I think we do know that, I think that the bigger hit on transit will probably be the longer term economic impact of this. In 2008, we didn't see transit fully recover until 2012. We actually didn't see VMT increase back up to 2008 levels until 2015. So I think all to say is that, for sure, continuing to have operating assistance will be important, but also, continuing to have resources to invest in the types of things that the Bay Area Council has been working on for years, which about making transit service better, more attractive, easier to ride, closing gaps, things like that will be really important for us to all sort of advocate for and to try to implement and to talk to the Hill and Sacramento about getting resources.
Okay, great. And can I assume, so shovel ready was a word that we used a lot in 2008-9, I think it was. I'm assuming that's a word that's going to be, or phrase that's going to be really popular again. Are you assembling shovel ready projects? Should our members that think they have them, be assembling them as well to provide to people like you and Crystal to help us get those things funded? Is that happening?
Yeah. Yes. And so MTC is the Transportation Planning, Financing, and Coordinating Agency for the region, for folks who don't know. And so we develop, long-range transportation plans. We've got a lot of lists of projects. Always share with our people if you guys have good ideas. And Crystal can speak to this probably more than I can about about what I have been hearing from a lot of people, a lot of pushback against shovel ready in the way that it was implemented under ARA.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah, so nobody.
You're absolutely right.
That didn't result in.
Can I ask, Crystal, can you talk about that a little bit? Or, well, both of you can, but Crystal can.
I mean, George is right. I mean, President Obama, after, the stimulus, he was like, yeah, we shouldn't have said shovel ready, because it takes longer to get projects up and running, even when they're almost halfway there. You have a lot of folks on the Hill are saying shovel ready doesn't work this time around. It just doesn't. So I know Republicans are looking, and Democrats are actually looking at expediting and getting rid of a lot of the red tape when it comes to projects. So this is something, that both parties have been looking at. They want to streamline in order to get, housing back up, because there is a huge demand. I mean, what is there? There's like a shortage of 7.3 million units nationwide, and a lot of them are in the state of California. So shovel ready in this instance does not work. It's a new dynamic. We got to get people back up and working and everything, and that's going to take a little bit. And the economic recovery is going to be long-term. So we're going to have to think outside the box and creatively about how we implement programs. And I can tell you from my experiences with Katrina, a lot of folks told me, you know what, do not come to me with new programs. So I said, okay, I'm just going to start looking at existing programs and tweak them. And I think that's what is going on right now. The Community Development Block Grant, they have a separate disaster recovery account as well. And mayors love that because it's flexible in nature. So that's one thing. I mean, and then the Department of Commerce's Economic Development Administration, the Public Works program that they have, That's something, you know, that people are going to look at and try and beef up. You know, they don't want to reinvent the wheel, but I mean, shovel ready in this instance, I mean, it just doesn't work.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. So let me return back to Michael. So a couple of questions came in or reminders. So one reminder that we got is that credit unions are SBA certified. So that's good to know. And then Anissa Cook asked if they've already applied directly through the SBA, they need to restart the process with their actual bank? And yeah, that's a question I was wondering about too, just for the Bay Area Council itself. So you had recommended working with your lender, Michael, but
John, I just think it'll be faster. And
okay.
and these lenders, I just got something, one of our clients from B of A this morning, and they say basically we're setting up an electronic portal. It should be ready by tomorrow, if not early next week. You submit all electronically. You know, it's a relatively simple submittal process.
Hey,
So,
Michael, are these funds unlimited, or is there a speed to market necessity
well,
for folks?
that's a good point. They were, you know, by that formula capped at 10 million or, you know, the 2.5 times payroll. Just this week, SBA issued additional guidance suggesting that it is anticipated that not more than 25% of the forgiven amount may be for non-payroll costs. In other words, now they're trying to really target it because they expect it to be oversubscribed. Now they're targeting it to payroll and emphasizing we want this money to be used for payroll, even though you can use it for these other expenses. At least 75% needs to be on payroll. So yes, we don't know. My sense is that this is, you know, that applications are coming in very quickly. And I know, you know, clients here at the firm are prepared to submit tomorrow morning. So there's still time. This runs through June 30th. But I think there is a strong speed element here, John.
Okay, great. And then there's a question that's come up. The Bay Area has a lot of usage of independent contractors or contingent workers versus, you know, pure employees. How does the loan program affect those different categories of employees?
I think there are two things to say on that, John. One is, in terms of covering payroll costs, as I mentioned, you can include payments not only to employees in figuring out your average or your yearly payroll, but also independent contractors. As for independent contractors themselves, believe it or not, they are included here. So it says independent contractors and self-employed individuals can apply for and receive loans to cover their payroll and other expenses during this period. So again, another really unique part of this payroll protection program is that it goes beyond traditional employers to include also people who are independent contractors, self-employed, to cover their expenses over this 8-week period.
Okay. Michael, how, you know, you have had a lot of interesting perches, but you've also, as you've mentioned, been through a recession or two in the past. How, you know, what, with your best analysis hat on, and you often do wear hats.
I do.
What are you seeing here? Is this a quick drop, quick bounce kind of scenario? Do you see this as a prolonged recession that's going to be lasting for a year or two? Are there any indicators that you're seeing, or just knowledge of the California or Bay Area economy, that would allow you to offer some sort of, we won't hold you to this, but just your best thoughts about what kind of drop and then recovery we might expect?
Well, I think it depends on how long we're in economic shutdown. I mean, it's no surprise that when we shut down the economy, jobs disappear. So the question becomes, when are we going to open up the economy? And obviously there's disagreement in terms of how soon. It sure doesn't look like we're doing anything until at least May. But the length of this will, in my view, determine how long it takes to get back. I think some of the points that Crystal and Georgia made are good ones concerning, and that you raised concerning, will people go back on transit even once it's opened up? Will they feel comfortable in other activities, even restaurants, once the economy opens up? So we have to see that. I would say there's no question. We've never seen anything remotely like this. During the depth of the Great Recession here in California, when we were at 12.4% unemployment, we had, in December 2009, we had around 80,000 new unemployment insurance claims. This morning, for a week. This morning, for last week, the claims in California were nearly 900,000. So, I mean, the speed, the scope of this job loss, the Great Recession was over a period of months, over years. We're seeing that virtually within a 3-week period.
Wow. Yeah, it's not good. Okay, so Georgia and Crystal, so a question early on in our session came from Shelley Doran, who's been a strident and very effective advocate for public-private partnerships, and so that would be that's something that the federal government, I believe, has sort of helped with infrastructure spending in the past, and the state government has, let's say, danced around it. Any chances in terms of policy reform that we might be able to see that would allow the dollars to be spent most quickly and most effectively? What's your feeling about the chances of getting those kinds of reforms through? Go ahead, Crystal, you go first.
Well, when I was talking to a Republican office earlier today, they don't think that this is the time to look at policy reforms. They just want to just see how the implementation is going, and then they can correct. But right now, because we've been, asking about once we get into the economic recovery phase, we need to make some changes with regards to land use and housing and with transportation. And they basically were like, well, that's nice, but right now we're focusing on making sure that people still have enough money in their pockets to have a roof over their head, to have food in their mouths. And so policy reforms, I mean, right now, I'm like, even in the infrastructure package that is likely going to happen, I mean, the Democrats will kind of push for it, but I think Republicans are going to push back. But I do think it's a very good idea, to have those ideas ready, because at some point, they're going to have to understand that the economic recovery has to happen, because John, just like you said, a lot of people are going to be afraid to get on public transit. A lot of people are going to be afraid to even get back on airplanes. And so you're going to have to figure out ways to incentivize folks to change their behavior. And so I think in a way to do that, policy reforms, and what the questioner was asking about, public-private partnerships, yes, everybody loves those, but as of right now, policy reforms are going to take a back seat until we actually get to the economic recovery stage.
Okay, great. Georgia, would you add anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, as Crystal is saying, I think that if there are small tweaks that folks can think of that would be really beneficial, to sort of expedite or smooth and make P3s easier to share with the feds, like it's a great thing to do. I'd also say that there are a lot of federal programs that are probably, that are in the running for being discussed that are already teed up to be good P3s. So, the Local Housing Tax Credit Program is a public-private partnership. TIFIA, WIFIA, BIFIA, all of the federal IFIA programs, are open to be public-private partnerships. You need a local partner, a public sector partner to come in, and so there's a lot that's already there in the federal world, and some of it is, I think, being creative, talking with your local partners about how to come together and put a package together. I think some of the issue in California has been that a lot of, local, one, the state, P3 challenges, and then two, that there are a lot of resources at the local level, and there's a lot of ability at the local level to get, good credit ratings, to bond out, and to have, public dollars be there for a lot of the initial capital investments, and then for us to bond off of. And, I think that local bonding capacity is going to look different now. So private sector partners coming in and helping with that, and being creative will be a beneficial thing. So I just encourage people to look at working through what already exists and identifying if there needs to be tweaks to those programs that already exist.
Okay, great. Thanks, Georgia. So Michael, let me ask you a question that's come up about, I'm going to ask you two questions. So one is about the average employee and what do they need to do to receive disaster relief funds? And I guess this question would probably split in two ways. So if they've been laid off or if they're still working. So why don't I'll stop with that, and then I'll return to my another question after that.
And independent contractors, but it doesn't flow through employees. So the employee theoretically could go to her or his employer and say, hey, this is a great program. There's a way to keep all of us on board and working, and we think you should apply. So it's really the application has to come from the employer, or as I say, if there's an independent contractor or sole proprietor.
Okay, although there are other provisions in the stimulus that would go directly to U.S. citizens that are available.
Well, there are a lot of other sections, and of course, in some ways, the most striking one is unemployment insurance, John.
Yeah.
Again, it's $600 per week. Now, in addition to the state benefit. So to put it in some perspective, for many workers making, say, $15, $16, $17 an hour, they'll actually be receiving more on UI than they received previously.
Right.
That's how large and generous is this UI increase, federal over the pandemic unemployment compensation.
Let me ask Michael, so one solution or idea, I guess, that I've heard from employers is potentially furloughing employees for a week or two, where they would come off the payroll for that week or two and be able to collect the unemployment benefits during that time. And then they would come back to working at the company as a way to preserve cash and sort of allow the company to keep functioning. But I'm wondering if a company does that, do they qualify for the other forgivable loans that are there, or do they have to make a choice between one or the other?
Well, it's not a choice. It's not one or the other, but that's a very good point. It is a balancing, because to get your loan 100% forgiven, you have to show you're not reducing payroll or laying off people past a certain number. So there is that consideration. Also, employers do have options beyond, you mentioned furloughs rather than layoffs, and that's an option. If an employee is put on furlough, they are eligible to collect unemployment insurance. So, I mean, you could furlough your workers. They are eligible to go and apply that day, or the date of furlough for UI, for unemployment, and can continue that unemployment. Now, there are other guidelines concerning furloughs versus layoffs and what you need to pay people when you lay them off in terms of, various benefits, but accrued. But in a nutshell, I think the important point if you do, furlough is an option. It allows the company to keep them on and allow people to still obtain UI.
Okay, great. So I think the question flow has slowed down a little bit. And so I think I'm going to wrap us up a little bit early. It's 90 minutes is a long time to do a webinar. We really appreciate everyone that's participating. But I do want to ask the three of you one final question. And I'll start with you, Georgia, but the same question to the three of you. What's the most important thing you think should be included if there is another relief package that will have the best impact?
mean, I work for a transportation and housing agency. I'd say I think the thing that needs to be included is something to get our healthcare system up and running over the longer term. And then, you know, more money for transportation and housing is always welcome.
Great. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Georgia. Crystal, what about you?
Oops. I honestly think the renters emergency assistance, that's going to be really, really needed, because again, like I said earlier, that is a ticking bomb that's about to go off, and this is going to affect a lot of the middle class. And so that, I hope that that is in the bill. And also I do hope that Congresswoman Maxine Waters' Housing as Infrastructure bill is incorporated in that, because it deals with a lot of different aspects about producing housing, but also it's you know, focusing a lot on expanding community development block grants for cities and how they can go about and using them. So I'm hoping that those two things will be in the next infrastructure package.
Thank you. And thanks. And Michael, what about you?
I'd say open up the damn economy as soon as possible. In other words, you know, obviously, John, we can't do anything right away. Obviously, we need to see how the spread goes over the next month. But, you know, people have raised the idea of public service employment and other stronger incentives, but it's hard to see anything gaining traction as long as the full shelter in place. So the sooner we can, perhaps in phases, open up the economy, that's the better.
Great. Okay. Hey, wow. Thank you very much. You've been very generous with your time. Thank you to all of our participants. Thank you to Rufus Jeffress and Justin, who helped put this together from the Bay Area Council staff. Crystal, Georgia, and Michael, you could not have done a better job and been more informative. So thank you to all of you. Remember, for participants, we will be doing this next week and sort of onward as we go. Appreciate everyone for participating. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you,
Thank you, Georgia and Michael.